Hi everyone, this is Adrian Campbell, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the four-way stop and left turns at these stops as it pertains to the interests of road transportation and safety engineers. So let's go ahead and kind of talk about the different kinds of four-way stops that we may encounter out there. Of course, no two stops are going to be the same. There's going to be different environments and numbers of lanes and all that kind of stuff, but there's going to be one really main basic type that we're going to encounter. And that most common one is just going to be one that has either a single or a double lane, two-way traffic on all the four approaches, with, like I said, either one or two lanes on either side of the yellow line. And they typically will not have a designated turning lane. And lastly, they will have typically a crosswalk across all of the four approaches. Um, the next most common, from what I've seen at least, would be the same setup except that it does have a designated turning lane. So, making a left turn at these sorts of stops. Now, let's go ahead and talk about how that would function in theory. Of course, we understand that um, the pedestrian traffic always has the right of way in these stops. A full stop is of course required, just like at any other stop sign. Vehicles proceeding through must go through in the order that they arrive at the stop. And of course, same time vehicles in the opposite lanes can go at the same time, except for if one of those people are turning left, and in that case they must yield. Same time arrivals in adjacent lanes, all of the leftmost vehicles must yield the right of way to the rightmost vehicle. So, in theory, all of our drivers in at our stop and all of our pedestrians at our stop understand these rules and understand this and have full faith in each other to execute their actions according to the rules and laws. So a person wanting to take a left turn in this situation would simply turn on their left blinker, ensure that it is their turn, ensure that there is no vehicle or pedestrian traffic that may impede them, and then they would proceed with the left turn. But of course, we understand that the world does not work that way. We can't truly have full faith in other people. We don't know if they may be distracted, or they might just not know how four-way stops work. Maybe they're from another country, or maybe they're from a city like Sedona where four-way stops aren't common. Of course, in Sedona, they typically have roundabouts there. So maybe they just don't know the rules. Of course, we have all these different variables that come into effect that kind of rob um, our attentive driver of their uh, confidence in the situation. They don't know how all the variables are going to play out, and so they have to approach the situation a little bit more cautiously. So, in practice, a vehicle may go out of turn. They may not be paying attention to the turn order, or maybe they misinterpreted the turn order and they end up going out of turn. They may they may understand it and they might just refuse to yield the right of way and they might go anyways. Um, and then of course we have the opposite situation where a vehicle with the right of way might yield to you or to some other driver. And we've seen this many times where a driver is stopped at a four-way stop and they go ahead and give you a hand signal and wave you through telling you it's okay to go. And of course, while this may seem like a kind gesture, we understand that that this sort of behavior sort of disrupts the flow of the four-way stop. It has disrupted the turn order that all the other drivers and pedestrians were aware of at the time. So it really kind of complicates things. Of course, a vehicle may fail to stop entirely. It happens sometimes more commonly with single stop signs than with four ways, but it does happen, especially in less busy areas where a vehicle may just completely blow through the stop sign, not slow down at all. So of course that's a dangerous situation. We wouldn't want to find ourselves in the middle of the intersection when that happens. A pedestrian may suddenly decide that they're going to go. Of course, pedestrians are also very attentive as well, typically. Um, Even though the pedestrian might know that they have the right of way, if they see a vehicle that may come across their path, they may be hesitant to enter the crosswalk at the time. They don't know if you're paying attention as the driver, and they don't want to put that trust in you. So the um, the pedestrian may hesitate for a bit, and so you as a driver might not understand where this pedestrian is intending to go, and the pedestrian might choose to enter the crosswalk after you've already committed to passing through the intersection. So that is something that we need to uh, keep an eye out for. Um, Another big thing is fast approaching cyclists. So we talked about fast approaching vehicles that might fail to stop in time at the four-way stop, but we also have cyclists, and cyclists are another story entirely because they sort of behave as pedestrian traffic, but they can also behave as vehicle traffic. And the reason why this is interesting and causes a potential problem is they're capable of higher speeds, but some cyclists go ahead and take the pedestrian right of way in these situations. So they may fail to stop at the stop sign. And of course, a bicyclist um, does not need to be immediately present at the stop to start going. Bicyclist may be going 15 miles an hour um, away from the just out of view and may suddenly enter the intersection while you're driving through it. So we need to be able to, as attentive drivers, we would want to be able to scan the surrounding area for potential cyclists or other fast-moving pedestrian traffic that may suddenly come into view and enter the intersection without paying attention. Maybe they're listening to music or they're just not paying attention. So what is the response to this? What does our attentive driver do in the real-world situation of the four-way stop? So like we said, he's not going to just flick on his blinker and go for it as soon as it's his turn, because we know that our attentive and careful, cautious driver does not have that kind of faith in their surrounding environment. So what are they going to do? They're going to go ahead and take a look for pedestrians first and foremost. They want to make sure that there's not going to be anyone that might potentially get into the crosswalk in their way. But they're also going to take a look at the pedestrians, and they'll typically take a guess and assume, just based on where the pedestrian is looking or where they're walking, they're going to go ahead and guess which way they're going to cross and whether or not they're going to cross at all. And of course, they're going to be looking for approaching pedestrian traffic like fast-moving cyclists, if at all possible. Of course, there could be things obstructing the view. I know that I have some four-way stops near my residence that have a lot of trees and bushes that obscure parts of the approaching sidewalk. And I have had cyclists kind of come out of that and startle me a bit there. So that's something that an attentive driver is going to be looking for before proceeding. Now, as far as vehicles go that are present at the stop, an attentive driver is typically going to be looking at the vehicles and looking at turn signals and trying to gauge the vehicle's intent, the driver's intent for what they're going to be doing. Of course, a driver may look like they're going to make a left turn and they might not have their blinker on. Or the opposite could be true. The driver may have their left turn signal on, but maybe they don't intend on actually turning. Maybe they turned it on by mistake. Of course, having a designated turning lane takes a little bit of the mystery out of this. So for the few stops that do have these, that is a nice thing to have. Of course, we're going to be looking for vehicle traffic that is oncoming, and we're going to be taking a look at their speed. Their speed is going to tell us whether or not they're actually planning on stopping at the stop sign. Of course, if you see a vehicle coming and they're only 50 feet away from the stop sign, but they appear to be traveling 50 miles an hour, you can probably be safe assuming that they may not stop in time. And so that's something we're going to want to look out for before we proceed through the intersection. And now when we're finally confident that as attentive drivers that we're ready to proceed into the intersection, we typically won't just step on the gas and go for it. We're going to inch out a little bit, especially if there's other traffic at the intersection. Inching out a little bit past the line before fully committing kind of lets everyone know your intent and lets everyone know, hey, I'm planning on going now. I believe it to be my turn, and I'm going to be going through the intersection now. So after inching out, an attentive driver will then proceed to commit fully to passing through the intersection. So, what are some things we can design for that maybe can help us out in these sorts of situations? Now that we have a better idea of what our cautious drivers look for in these sorts of situations, what our cautious drivers are concerned about, what they're looking out for, we can kind of design around that and kind of ease the burden on our pedestrian and vehicle traffic. So some things to consider is, of course, the addition of a designated turning lane for left turns, if the space allows it on the road. I know not all roads have the room for it, but if the space allows it, like I said before, having a designated turning lane really takes a lot of the guesswork out of judging the intent of other vehicles and what they're trying to do. I know that I've had, there is a four-way stop near the university that I go to, and it has designated turning lanes, and it definitely functions much smoother. Things go by a little quicker. It seems that people kind of move with more confidence through that four-way stop, as opposed to the four-way stop that follows another 150 feet after, in which case people tend to be a little bit more hesitant. So I've noticed the addition of a designated turning lane does certainly help, not only in easing the concerns of the drivers, but also in increasing the flow of traffic. Another huge thing is going to be non-obstructing landscape. So like I said, we want to be careful that there's no oncoming fast-moving cyclists that are going to blow through the intersection right as we're kind of going through it. Because of course a cyclist is not very protected from a vehicle in a collision, so that's not a collision that we want to get into especially. So large bushes and even large trees especially could even obscure oncoming vehicle traffic. So we definitely don't want to be obscured from that. We would definitely want to be able to see at least 50 to 100 feet along either of the roads that are joining at the four-way stop. That's going to let us better judge the safety of the situation as attentive drivers. Speed bumps, the addition of speed bumps before the four-way stop can help to ensure that fast-moving traffic does not approach the four-way stop. So that's something that I've seen implemented a lot and is typically found at these sorts of stops and works pretty well. Another thing is clearly marked sidewalks with or crosswalks rather, with accompanying road signs. Something that I see a lot is very small crosswalks, often faded. These are the kinds of crosswalks you see at four-way stops. They're smaller crosswalks. They're not at major intersections typically, and they sometimes do not have signage, or the signage may be obscured. So having the signage in the clearly marked crosswalks is a way to just keep our drivers attentive and aware that there may be pedestrians around and intending to cross. So that's something that could just keep us a little safer, both on our end as vehicle drivers and as pedestrians. So if there are any questions, I can go ahead and answer those right now, or you can feel free to email me. Otherwise, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to present this to you. I hope you have a nice day. Bye-bye.